Hello and welcome to episode 75 of Linux After Dark. I'm Joe.
I'm Chris.
I'm Gary.
And I'm Dalton.
Welcome back, chaps.
In my job, we've been learning a lot of new things recently, and I'm struggling to keep on top of them. So I wondered what everyone is doing when they need to learn and remember new things, specifically in Linux and FOSS, because to me, it seems so broad, I can't keep on top of it.
The key is to not learn anything new ever.
We tried that, Joe. We want to go for the Graham approach and be running CentOS 7 in 2035, but we have to move on.
He's running CentOS 6.
Exactly. But I feel like my brain and my notes collection is disparate, spread, disorganized, and I know it should be better, but actually doing that is hard. I learn by failing a lot, and I think that's a really important thing. And you should just get stuck in and not be scared to fail. And we're in a period where that's easier. VMs, containers, build it up, trash it down, burn it, throw it, smash it, format it, write it, do it again.
Bop it.
Exactly. Bish it, bash it, bop it. So that's useful, but practice makes permanent. So if you're doing things wrong or you don't make good notes, you just become a failure. To progress, you need to make notes and iterate and learn. But it's difficult.
I found that what I really try to do is just anytime I'm doing anything, I then write it down, because if I don't, I'm going to lose it in my bash history, is the long and short of it. So if I'm creating some new procedure to do a thing on our infrastructure, I'm either going to be putting that on a wiki page or in Slack, which is not a good place to put it, by the way. We do pay for Slack Premium, but I just do that right away to try and make sure that it's somewhere other than just on the machine that it happened on. I don't have a good note-taking procedure, really. For personal things, I use Joplin if I have a burst of creativity and need to write something down or anything like that. But usually I find that the moment I need Joplin, I haven't set it up on this computer yet. So there's no way for me to use it. I have to go to my phone and type it out laboriously with 2 thumbs, and I have RSI.
Having an audience helps, I think. We have to present documentation and reply to support tickets, which means immediately you have to try and step out of yourself. So the notes aren't just, I fucking did this, bullet point, shit, link, hyperlink, crap, that you could just about reassemble for yourself. It has to be, this person doesn't know what this is at all. We have to go through step by step, and it has to make sense. And you get other people to read it and they'll go, you've skipped a bit there because you're making an assumption that that person knows. But what that means is when you revisit that blog post or documentation page or support ticket, if you've done it well, it gives you a good record. But being disciplined to do that consistently, especially when you've been working all day and now this is your fun computer time, that's really hard.
Dalton, you mentioned the bash history thing. Just Control R, Control R, Control R, Control R until you find it, surely.
Sometimes it works, but sometimes it leads me to the wrong place. And sometimes I've run a really, really long command, like paragraphs long command, that anything I type in is automatically going to hit that because it just has the most letters in it. So that doesn't work so well.
What about a different shell then? One of the fancy ones that remembers history and is properly searchable?
I don't believe in those newfangled things.
Well, surprise, surprise, I do not either, but it could be a solution, couldn't it?
I mean, maybe. I know that Martin has been talking about Atuin, the shell history thing, and I've thought about it, but ultimately it's not exactly what I want. I want it, if it's something that I need more than once, that's the trigger for me to think, okay, I need to put this somewhere else than just in my bash history. Especially because a lot of things that I do are things that someone else on my team are going to need to do at work. And if I'm doing something like that huge Mac thing that I had to figure out how to run open firmware and get the Ubuntu thing done and everything, I had to do that process for myself multiple times because it turned out my compact flash card was failing. So ultimately, it's basically just a trigger. I need to write this down rather than I need better tools to remember this for me.
But Dalton, surely one of these fancy new AI shells could do that for you. It would definitely know all the commands to rebuild the Ubuntu 6.06 ISO from scratch.
Gary, I've already had one panic attack this week. I don't need another one.
I think the problem with the bash history is it's a stream of consciousness, isn't it? The whole point is that you then have to curate it after the fact. I think Dalton's hit the nail on the head to a degree. You have to strike while the iron is hot and curate what you've done into a documented process that you can revisit. Bash history is just a stream of everything you did, including the typos, the fuck-ups, the command that was almost right, but you got a colon instead of a semicolon in there.
Or the command that was almost right, but it accidentally removed the entire directory you were in.
Yes. So the idea is that it's a bit like Slack. You mentioned Slack. We don't pay for Pro, but even over the 3 months, you can search for stuff, but everyone chips in. That's a record of history, not a record of process.
For me, bash history is literally just there if I cannot be bothered to retype the same command again next week. That's all it's good for.
Yeah, it's for cases where I know what the command I want is, but I don't want to go to the documentation to copy-paste it.
Yeah, or I need to type a really long command to run an Ansible playbook across a certain set of hosts or something ridiculous.
I can just never remember the syntax for the find command, and so I just Control-R it.
Yeah, that's fine. That's a perfectly valid use case.
I swear there are certain things. It's gone in now, but for ages, I got symlinks the wrong way round. And quite a lot of people I meet still end up in the same thing. They're like, is it the source or the target first? Like, what is going on?
You figured it out. Please tell me, which way is it?
I tell you what it is. It's from organizing my Linux ISOs collection, because that's how I make the format of them readable for metadata.
Similarly, actually, that's how I know about symlinks, and I'm always linking to the directory that I'm in, and so I know to always end with a dot. So that's why I know it's always source, then destination.
I'm trying to think, like, is that right? I don't know.
It is right. No, he's right. He's 100% right.
Yeah, because I always think to myself, like, link ubuntu.iso here, and I just consider that dot to be here.
I still think that command should be the other way around.
Only sometimes.
Don't confuse me.
I've had this situation where commands are just confusing. Most recently with the command in Debian and Ubuntu, dpackage divert. So what dpackage divert does is it takes a file that's installed by a package and moves it out of the way so that a different package can put a file there. Ooh. It is used for internet fights in Debian. No, it's not. It's used for cases where you have a binary that you want to provide, but you also want upstream's binary, or you have a dependency situation that can't be resolved without the package being there. It's very useful for a very wide number of situations. It takes a --pkg argument, and the package that you provide there is not the one that you want to move out of the way. It is the one that is providing the new file. And trying to explain this to people who are just getting into it is like, oh my God, why did they write it this way?
This is the other thing, right, Dalton, which can be tricky, because as a team at work, we have strengths and weaknesses, and there'll be some things that I just can't pick up, like Puppet, for example. The syntax for Puppet just will not go in my head. And there's other members of my team where they're like, yeah, you just do this, and this. And I'm like, okay, that didn't go in. And I'm still trying to get used to it. Whereas other things will tap into my previous experience. But then relating that to people can be actually harder, because you're like, well, I understand this, so it's obvious. And then when you go to explain it to someone, it's not obvious because their frame of reference is a different shape.
Yeah, no, in the case of dpackage divert, it's written like that because the intended audience for dpackage divert is package maintainers who need to provide a rule to move someone else's file out of the way. So you are declaring my package wants to get rid of that file. That's completely non-obvious for just a user of Debian who doesn't think about any of that maintainer script stuff.
Well, I've got a hack for chown where you can't remember whether it is user directory or directory user. I've had to restore my laptop quite a few times recently, and that has involved me copying my entire home directory back. But I have to do that as root, and then I have to chown it -r. And because the home directory is called Joe and my user's called Joe, I just do chown-r jojo, and I don't have to remember. Life hack.
I thought you were going to say the hack for remembering chmod is just 777.
Yep.
Yeah,
That resolves everything, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
definitely. That'll fix all your PHP BB problems.
And they tried so hard to add an easier syntax with the like O plus RWX stuff, but I could never remember if O is owner or other.
Yeah, I use numbers. One of my colleagues much prefers the letters and the pluses and everything. No, the numbers are much more... there you go, a case in point. Different perspective to achieve the same goal.
I really should document somewhere what permissions my SSH directory and my private key need, because I know it's like 600 and I have to look it up every single time. Okay, this episode is sponsored by people who support us with PayPal and Patreon. Go to linuxafterdark.net/support for details of how you can support us too. Patreon supporters have the option to listen to episodes without ads like this. And it's not just this show. There's Late Night Linux for news, discoveries, audience input, and misanthropy, 2.5 admins about system administration, Linux Matters for upbeat, family-friendly adventures, Linux Dev Time about developing with and for Linux, Hybrid Cloud Show for everything private and public cloud, and Ask the Hosts for off-topic questions from you. You can even get some episodes a bit early. We've got a lot going on, and it's only possible because of the people who support us. So if you like what we do and can afford it, it would be great if you could support us too, at linuxafterdark.net/support. Quick bit of admin then. First of all, thank you everyone who supports us with PayPal and Patreon. We really do appreciate that. If you want to join those people, you can go to linuxafterdark.net/support. And for either $5 or $10 a month on Patreon, you can get an advert-free RSS feed of either just this show or all the shows in the Late Night Linux family. And if you want to get in contact with us, you can email show@linuxafterdark.net.
We're having this conversation as what I would say are fairly seasoned Linux users, right? When you take that outside to someone who's new, I'll give you a case in point. WSL is obviously really popular, especially in a managed work environment. But you can create SSH keys on Windows and put them in .ssh in the user directory for the Windows account. The trouble is that that directory doesn't understand the permissions that Linux understands. So a lot of users then spin up WSL because they think, oh, this gives me the same shell that I've got on, say, an HPC cluster, and it's fine. So I know now I've learned SSH-I, point it at the key. No, it won't have it. And then they look up how to change the permissions and try and do that, and it still doesn't work because the file system that the SSH key is being stored in doesn't understand it. When you look up the solution for that, the two options are, A, copy it into a directory inside WSL, then you have the correct file system. Or you can invoke the SSH command and WSL with about 5 or 6 different flags to change the way the file system works in terms of metadata and mounting so that you can keep them in the Windows directory and trick WSL into thinking everything is fine.
Is that a bit like when you had to SSH into that ancient Ubuntu system with loads of flags?
Yes, exactly that. So you've got like the SSH command has so many flags. And yeah, when we were doing the challenge with the really, really old Ubuntu, you can't just do SSH from something running 2204, 2404, Debian Bookworm. The ciphers have been understandably revoked from the SSH client to try and protect you. They don't want you to do that.
By default, but you can actually do it then.
Yeah, you can if you really, really want to. I mean, if the server's configured as well to reject that, if you're running a properly admin server, then no, you're not going to allow that. But I'm SSHing into a Ubuntu 4.10 box, you know, it's a VM. And you get in the weeds really, really quickly. And I think SSH especially, it's actually a really tricky thing for a lot of people to get hold of. They're not stupid people, but some other facilities that we speak to, they don't use SSH. They will use some kind of GUI web-based portal to give the user a shell, and it's backed by some other credentials management like Keycloak or a single sign-on provider that then authenticates them.
Gravitational teleport and stuff like that.
Exactly, things like that. Because it's really, you can quickly get into a mess when you try and SSH in.
I think that more than that, the act of explaining to someone why the thing they are trying doesn't work is really how I solidify that information in my mind. Because you're meeting someone from all sorts of different places when they're trying to do something like this. At work, for example, we have a certificate-based authentication system with SSH, and we're basically going to that everywhere because we can't do long-lived keys anymore. And trying to explain to people, like, your SSH agent loaded in your old key before you loaded in the new certificate. So you try to use the old key first, and the server tells you, no, I don't accept those, and just kicks you off. So you need to reorder the order in which keys are loaded into your agent so that you can do this. Like, just explaining that concept and the why behind the problem is really how I come to understand these things and manage to retain them for the long term. Maybe someday I'll have to explain to someone why the ln command is the way it is, and then I'll just know for the rest of time.
Is the answer to all of this wikis?
No.
No. Because wikis get stale and the indexing is poor, the information becomes outdated, or as I've recently found in some wikis, the information is in like 10 different places and I don't know which version of that information I should believe, or someone's written their own wiki page about their own specific way of doing a certain thing. It's just a bad way of doing it. But I also can't suggest a better way.
Well, tell that to Arch that it's a bad way of doing it. That thing is amazing.
I have to say that is frequently, regardless of which distro you're on, the place. Recently, Joe, you were having a problem and it was the answer. You were having a problem on Ubuntu, but
yeah,
it is incredibly well curated for all of the by the way memes and everything else that gets thrown around about Arch. It's an incredible manual for using modern Linux.
I think that that's the case, though, that you need someone or a group of people who are really excited about taking that documentation and continuing to make it good. It needs to be something that's embedded into the culture of your organization or community or your brain, whoever it's for. And if you don't have that, then like anything else, it's just going to become a mess of the commons.
It's an altruistic act as well, isn't it? Because I do this all the time. We've discussed it. If I fix a problem, I really should raise a pull request if the project is a FOSS project. I fix something and I could raise a pull request pointing out what the problem is, how I fixed it. I have the skill set to do it, and I so frequently don't. And it's the same with documentation. Fixing something is one thing, but then going, right, I should write this in a way that other people can interpret to fix this problem, even though I've now fixed this problem for myself and it's not a problem anymore.
Yeah, because once you've fixed it, you've got another ticket to deal with or another personal problem to deal with, and you don't have time to help anyone else, do you?
This is it, isn't it? The train rolls on. So kudos to those that either have the time or the willpower to push through and do that. And I had it this week. I didn't do it, but a coworker did raise an issue on GitHub. It was responded to within a few hours. The patches went in and a new container was made available and it fixed the problem. And it was incredibly satisfying. It was how it's supposed to work.
Or you go to the effort of doing that, like I did with OpenShift, and the problem's still there about 5 years later.
I think it's important what Dalton said as well. I have had an experience recently where I'm learning something that none of us know, and the act of trying to explain what you think is the answer to someone reveals that that's not the answer, but the two of you arrive at the actual answer for the thing by talking it out. So you go to explain something to someone and they say, hang on, isn't that just that instead? And you go, oh, yes, it is. And then that solidifies that. But that's still two brains and no writing.
That's unfortunately the promise that most executives think AI has right now for developers, that developers are going to be able to talk with the large language model and it's going to say, well, hold on a minute, you're an idiot. But in every case that I've found, I've had to tell the large language model, no, you're an idiot.
I don't know what you're talking about. It's Universal Basic GPT. It's all sorted out. We're all going to get our slice of AI, and that's the answer to every single thing. I was quite optimistic, but my hope for this year that we're nearly halfway through was that the hype train would die down, and no, it's not, is it?
No.
It's so chugging along its tracks.
And even for this topic, if you give it a bunch of information that is useful and curated and correct, it's still going to spit out something wrong from way back in its training because it doesn't have cognition. It doesn't correctly bias between these things. It's a flatworm.
Doesn't feel pain, it can't be reasoned with.
Exactly.
So, in conclusion, we don't really have an answer to this problem.
But I'm sure plenty of people will tell us their answer to documenting things and making notes, whether we like it or not.
Yes, indeed. Obsidian and everything else emails are flying in as we speak, I'm sure.
Right, well, we better get out of here then. We'll be back in a couple of weeks, but until then, I've been Joe.
I've been Chris.
I've been Gary.
And I've been Dalton.
See you later.